Thank you so much for joining us today. This is the Author and Friends webinar with Defend Our Health and Island Press. We really appreciate you coming out today. I'm Carey Perez de Alejo. I'm the Executive Director at Defend Our Health. We are a Maine-based nonprofit that works at the Maine level and nationally with partners across the country to advance toxic-free futures, to reduce contaminants in our food, in our water, in our consumer products, and our communities. Today, we are going to be talking about how we address and solve complex problems like environmental pollutants, such as PFAS, microplastics, climate change. Our talk today is going to be with Dr. Beth Sawin, who is the author of Multisolving. She's going to give us a little bit of a background on her concept and book. And then we are also in conversation today with Adam Nordell, who is Defender Health's organizer, focused on PFAS in farmlands, in sludge, really protecting folks in Maine and across the country from toxic chemicals such as PFAS forever chemicals. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Sawin in a moment. I just want to highlight that this is being recorded. So if you miss any part of it, we will be sending out the recording afterwards. And we will be doing Q&A questions at the end. So if you do have any questions for Adam or Beth, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and then we will address them towards the end of the talk. And with that, Beth, take it from here.
Great. Thanks so much, Emily. Thank you for that invitation to be here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, partly because I don't know so much about PFAS. I probably know what the typical consumer knows, worry about my family, worry about farmland. So I'm looking forward to just talking with Adam, learning about the organizing that he's doing. And what we really want to explore is how the principles of multi-solving, and I'll explain what that is in a minute, how those principles show up in the work that Defend Our Health is doing. So my job in the next couple minutes is to sort of set that frame of multi-solving. It's a word that you might not know, but my guess is that it's a concept you probably apply in your life, maybe in your work. And really what it means is prioritizing the types of actions where $1 or one amount of time or effort can meet multiple needs at the same time. A classic example of that is that if a city is able to increase the amount of green space, that is one intervention that ends up meeting a lot of different needs, particularly as we face more and more impacts from climate change. So the first thing is that more vegetation keeps a city cooler, and that is going to be better for people's health, especially during times of a high heat index. It's also going to save energy and therefore money by reducing the need for air conditioning for cooling. And that in addition, if you're cutting out energy use that comes from fossil fuels, you're minimizing the contribution to climate change through that action. And then as cities around the country face more and more extreme rainfall, if you have things like rain gardens and green roofs and these vegetative structures in cities, they can help soak up stormwater, and in that way they can help prevent some flooding. So there's a resilience property. And then of course there's biodiversity in the sense that these plantings can be selected to support insects and pollinators. And then there's the really important mental health benefits. There's lots of studies that show how green space improves people's mental health. So that's a whole set of different needs that one intervention can make. And my colleagues and I at Multisolving Institute have the great good fortune to work with people around the world who have a special aptitude for finding these points of intervention where one intervention meets multiple needs. And so what we're going to have a chance to explore today is in what ways this approach of multi-solving might be relevant to work on toxics, including PFAS. And to kick that off, Adam, I think if you could just give everyone a real quick kind of primer on what PFAS is and what we should know just for this conversation.
Thanks so much, Beth. Thanks for that introduction to multi-solving, excuse me. I'm really excited for this conversation and excited to use this framework to think about issues that I think about every day in a slightly new way. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks also to Emily for getting us going, and to everyone who's joined and is spending part of their afternoon with us. I'm excited to be here with you all. So PFAS, I recognize some names in the list of attendees. So folks are already, some of the folks are already familiar with these issues, but PFAS is an acronym for a class of industrial chemicals. PFAS stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. They're a class of chemicals that are used in industry for their non-stick, oil-resistant, water-resistant, and heat-resistant properties. So we see them in consumer products and industrial products, like non-stick cookware, like high heat firefighting foam, Gore-Tex rain gear, et cetera, and there are many, many more less famous iterations of products in which PFAS have been used. We're talking about them today because they, as a class of chemicals, the last estimate that I saw was that the group of PFAS contains as many as 15,000 individual chemistries. And the properties that unite those chemicals as a class are that they persist indefinitely in the environment. They're characterized by the super strong carbon-fluorine bond that isn't formed in nature. And basically none of our natural systems are equipped to break that bond. So one PFAS chemical might degrade into another PFAS chemical, but the essential PFAS chemistry persists in the environment. Many of them bioaccumulate as you go up the trophic levels in the food chain, including the human food chain, which is our food system. You can get higher and higher levels of PFAS exposure for many of the compounds. And most consequentially, they have toxic health impacts. These chemicals are leading to elevated risk of a number of cancers, liver disease, ulcerative colitis, which is an autoimmune disorder of the digestive tract, suppressed immune system function, thyroid disorders, they're endocrine disruptors. They're chemicals that we do not want in our lives if we can at all avoid them. So that's the basic problem. They've been manufactured since the 1940s. We didn't, as the public, learn about the toxicity issue or their persistence until the late 1990s. And now we're increasingly coming to understand that they are widespread in our environment. They are in our waste stream. They are in our consumer products, as Emily mentioned. And we all have suffered an unsafe exposure to these chemicals across the population. We all have levels of PFAS in our own bodies without our consent. And across the population, that results in increased instances of cancers and other negative health outcomes. So this is a complex, thorny problem that we need to tackle. And fortunately, we have a multi-solving expert on the line with us today. So let's do it.
Yeah. Well, as I said in my opening, one characteristic of multi-solving is that if you take an action, it ripples out into multiple benefits or meets multiple needs. So I thought it'd be interesting if you could walk us through, Adam, if your mission as an organization was successful and PFAS was, both like stopped at the source and removed from the environment. What would we expect to get better in the world? Like, I think some things are probably obvious, but I bet there's some surprises too. So how would that vision play out, do you think?
Certainly. Yeah, we talk a lot about turning off the tap on PFAS. And sometimes we mean turning off the tap on production. And then sometimes we mean turning off the tap at the points at which PFAS are cycling through our environment, points at which we have some leverage to halt their dispersal, to halt new contamination. And if we could do that, if I could today convince every relevant policymaker that this is a pressing issue that needs to be solved, we would see reduced instances of cancer. We would see healthier communities. We would see greatly decreased environmental contamination across our society. We have readily available alternatives to the use of PFAS in most of the instances in which it's used in commerce. Of course, when we think about non-stick pans, there are many other ways you can easily successfully cook a beautiful meal without a Teflon coated frying pan. So by altering a policy framework where we're phasing out that use that poses a direct risk to food prepared in the home, PFAS can migrate out of the Teflon coating and get directly into the food. They can also send aerialized PFAS into our homes, famously posing a fatal health risk to pet birds, but also to the people living in the home. So within our home, we as consumers are protected, where our toxic exposure is decreased if we as communities ask our policymakers, this is important, please turn off the tap. We don't need these chemicals in our cookware. But then when you look outside of the individualized exposure, I grew up thinking about reading 50 simple things you can do to save the environment, this sort of like very individual action-based version of the environmental movement that was popular in the 1980s and 1990s. And what can I do at home, which is in some ways very empowering, but we really need to solve the problems as communities, because it's not just about preventing my exposure. It's not just about preventing a health risk to my pet bird. I don't have one, but I wouldn't want it to get sick if I did. The facilities that are manufacturing PFAS, we'll talk a little bit more about environmental justice impacts later, I think, but it's not just about the frying pan in my home. The production of that frying pan and the business model that supports it is responsible for an enormous PFAS release that's poisoning the public water supply of 500,000 people and posing all sorts of intertwined exposure risks for people where the chemicals are manufactured and also where our waste streams terminate in the landfill, in sludge spread farming. So long story short, we would all be a lot healthier if we could just get these chemicals out of production and stop introducing them into our environment.
Yeah, I found myself wondering if there would be benefits beyond the human. Like, these chemicals are so prevalent in water and soil now. Are they impacting invertebrates or mammals or plants? What's known about that?
I don't know as much about that as I would like to. That's a good question, and I definitely I know there are researchers that are looking into ecological impacts, and I haven't had the opportunity to read those studies, but we're not so different from the other species that live here on the planet. As there might be slightly different impacts to birds versus mammals, to different types of mammals, but fundamentally these are chemicals that none of the species that exist on Earth evolved in the presence of. We don't our body's systems aren't equipped to process them. We're not able to expel them from our bodies. They persist in the human body for many decades once we've been exposed, and I think in many cases that's no different
Right.
when you think about ecological systems and animals. So certainly we need to protect our wild animal and plant communities as well.
Yeah, well, and the way you're answering also makes me realize that the industrial chemical industry is creating things it really doesn't understand the full impacts of, and has been for decades. And that sort of connects to the next question. So Multisolving is an idea that grows out of work in systems theory that treats the economy, but also the planet and people as interconnected systems. And we talk a lot about stocks and flows, how energy and materials cycle through ecological systems. And one of the leading teachers of systems thinking is Donella Meadows. She wrote a famous book about systems thinking called Thinking in Systems. And she's famous for saying there's no such thing as a way, that we think we put something in the trash and it's gone. But in an interconnected system, that doesn't make sense. And it strikes me that PFAS is almost a poster child for there's no such thing as a way. And I know some of your work is trying to work with that fact, but to help kind of gather up this chemical that entropy has spread throughout the planet. So what does that look like? What's promising in that regard?
Yeah, great question. A lot to wrestle with there. Yeah, what do you do with an environmentally persistent chemical? Where do you put it? That's a really important question. Where do you put something that in many cases you can't pick up once you set it down, once it's dispersed into soil and water? It's exceedingly expensive or maybe currently unfeasible to remediate soil, for example. We need to be very, very careful. We need to be very thoughtful about how we manage our waste streams, and we need to start by identifying where PFAS is cycling through our environment, where PFAS is entering our waste stream, whether that's at the point of production, where the Chemours chemical company in eastern North Carolina is making Teflon, is spewing Teflon. Well, I think they're now filtering their wastewater, but for many years was releasing PFAS contaminated water directly into the Cape Fear River, which, as I mentioned, is the drinking water supply for many hundreds of thousands of people. Which PFAS-laden waste products are getting incinerated at a factory or at a garbage incinerator, and what downstream communities are being impacted by aerial deposition when the rain sweeps those PFAS chemicals out of the air and deposits them down on garden soil, farm soil, forested land, surface water ponds and rivers. And then they
So
begin.
combustion doesn't break them down. It just volatilizes them or something.
That's right. Apparently, very, very high heat controlled combustion can destroy the carbon-fluorine bond. Someone on this call is going to correct me in the Q&A, but I think 1700 degrees Celsius, 2700 degrees Celsius, there's a very high heat point at which the carbon-fluorine bond can be broken, ostensibly, and the fundamental PFAS chemistry can be undone. But that's not a temperature at which almost any incinerator operates. It's a very specialized, expensive operation that's burning that hot. Yeah. And then a lot of my work is about sewage sludge. PFAS are leaching out of consumer products in our home. They're leaching out of the products that are used in small businesses, at a car wash that uses a fluorinated wax at the end of its process to keep our cars dust-free and sparkly for the next few days. Gyms that might use like a school gym or a other facility that might use a toxic wax that's contributing to the wastewater stream. Larger businesses that are manufacturing a product that intentionally contains PFAS. Those are contributing PFAS to our wastewater stream. All of that's going down the drain and winding up in sewage sludge that in many states, no longer in Maine, no longer in Connecticut, but in most states around the country, sludge gets marketed to farmers as a fertilizer. And of course, it does contain nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, which are nutrients that help plants grow. But what else does it contain? What else is leaching out of our washing machine spin cycle? All of the microplastics from synthetic clothing, for example, going down the drain and accumulating in the sludge, wind up staying on those farm soils. And you ask, where does it go? Too often, any of these facilities, whether it's the factory or the incinerator or the sludge, the end destination for the sludge, what community is least well prepared to reject something that poses a risk to them? Those tend to be the people who are most at risk.
Yeah, I mean, and so this is another theme that we see in all sorts of multi-solving, is of course the consequences of everything from climate change to toxic pollution don't land equally on a society. As you say, they tend to impact most the people who are most marginalized, whether that's because of poverty or race or ethnicity. And so in my book, actually, I devote a whole chapter to the idea of equity, and it's a fundamental principle of multi-solving. If you're pursuing these multiple benefits, the best way to do it is with this great care and attention to equity and to justice. And I know that is deep in the strategy of Defend Our Health too. So if you just share a little bit about how you all think about that, how it plays into how you design your work. I think we'll talk about that, and then it's probably time for some Q&A after that.
That sounds great. I'm so glad that's a focus of your book too. It's such a centrally important aspect to thinking about environmental impacts, and especially environmental health impacts. Who really is bearing that burden? Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Here in Maine, with our work on PFAS, we think about the impacts of our waste stream on our tribal communities, on our friends and partners at the Penobscot Nation, which is Maine's largest indigenous tribe. And curiously, the landfill operated by Casella Waste Systems is located very close to the Penobscot Nation. And one of the ways that a landfill can impact its surrounding environment is through the production of something called leachate, which is water that percolates down through the landfill, collecting any number of toxic chemicals on its way down. In most landfills, most modern landfills, there's some sort of lining and collection system. In older landfills, that leachate goes straight into the groundwater, which poses all sorts of risks and hazards. But in this case, Casella is collecting their leachate, and then they're sending it to be processed at a wastewater treatment plant directly upstream from the Penobscot Nation on the Penobscot River. The Penobscot Nation are a riverine tribe. Their identity, their culture, their history, their peoplehood is intimately connected to the Penobscot River. And for forever, they have been drawing their cultural resources and their subsistence resources from the river. They're harvesting fish from and other wild species from the river. And we know that PFAS bioaccumulate in fish once they're in our surface waters. So that's a sort of a screamingly loud example of how things can go wrong. And another example that I'm thinking about a lot right now is a large sludge composting operation located near where I live in an unorganized territory. In Maine, we have all of these towns with no local governance. So there's no city council, there's no local politicians who can channel the concerns of their constituents and enact a policy to protect them should something go wrong. One of those unorganized territories is called Unity Township. It's a very poor rural community, about 40% unemployment. And since the early 1990s, there's been this corporate-run sludge composting operation there. Sludge from Maine wastewater districts goes there. It gets composted and sent to farms. And now sludge from other states is getting composted there. Maine DEP, Maine Department of Environmental Protection, has been doing a lot of sampling there. And it's one of the most severely contaminated sites in our state. There's a PFAS groundwater plume that exceeds our state's drinking water standards by many hundreds of times. The chemicals have accumulated in game species like turkey and deer. Maine is a rural state. We have strong hunting and fishing subsistence traditions. They're cultural traditions, but whether people are members of the Penobscot Nation and certainly have deep cultural ties to those sorts of food sources, but rural Mainers who might be white also have a deep hunting and fishing tradition that is cultural, that is a subsistence tradition. People are filling their freezers with that meat. And we now know that it's contaminated, and the state is saying it's not safe to eat that meat. What impact does that have on that community? How can we partner with communities like the rural folks in Unity Township and our friends at the Penobscot Nation? If there's no city council in Unity Township, where's the next point of leverage where we can work with them to protect their environment, to protect their health going forward? So that's sort of, those are some of the ways that we try to address environmental justice, community impacts.
Well, I mean, I think it's, as you said, this is, this chemical has been around since the 1940s. So we're in a deep hole that was created over a lot of decades. One thing in Multisolving that we try to learn from the bright spots as well of where there's been, even if it's just a partial success. So maybe before the Q&A, if you would hold up one or two of those from your work for us of, you mentioned some new legislation, what else is going on that's a bright spot?
Sure. Yeah, we've been fortunate to partner with impacted communities and frontline communities here in Maine to get a bunch of great legislation passed. And some of our friends on the call will be familiar with that, but we were the first state in the country to turn off the tap on sludge spreading. Connecticut has followed us now. Other states are considering regulating sludge more tightly. We've worked with all of our friends and partners at the Safer States Coalition to get policies in place like a phase out on all PFAS in consumer products. That's a big win. And working together with partners in other states that are duplicating that kind of legislation, it's shifting the whole market. So that has ripples far beyond Maine.
Yeah.
And then one other bright spot, if I can, that composting facility that I just mentioned, our DEP just pressured them to shut down their operations. So no longer will that community be seeing trucks full of out-of-state sludge come through their streets every day. And now we need to ensure that the site's cleaned up, that the people are protected for the long haul. But in the meantime, we can turn off the tap and stop ongoing contamination, which is a big win, I think.
Yeah. No, that's incredible. I mean, my last thought, and then Emily, we're probably ready for your Q&As, but in the world of climate change, people spend a lot of time, sometimes it gets called solar punk, imagining what do our streets look like? What do our cities look like when we're off of fossil fuels and building resilience? And I just feel in this last conversation, that we need a similar long view for PFAS, like what's going to be the economic engine in Unity Township now? The toxic trucks stopped coming, but I imagine some jobs probably stopped too. And, is remediation a pathway for young people to consider? And what about the chemistry of breaking that down? Like, surely there's a fungus or a bacteria or something that can do that chemistry. Like, what's that 100-year project look like? So those are some things I'll be trying to imagine now after this conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both, Beth and Adam. We do have a couple of questions, and I think there's one that kind of builds directly off of that. So you're kind of talking about different ways that we've got policies that can address this issue and turn off the tap. And one of the participants asked if, at the root of the PFAS problem, we've got kind of corporate accountability as one of these issues. So if manufacturers aren't being held accountable for pollution they cause, how do we tackle that? And what can multi-solving as an approach offer us as a potential solution to this kind of systemic, once it's already here problem?
Yeah. Well, one, I can give one thought and then we'll see what Adam thinks. But one of the reasons multi-solving is an effective strategy is that it brings together the different constituencies who are impacted by the same root cause. Because as you're saying, as the question implies, there's an issue of power here, an imbalance of power, right? Like some very powerful corporations against people being impacted from rural communities, from indigenous communities, maybe the workers at some of these manufacturing facilities. But without organizing those constituencies, they don't know each other, they don't understand their common cause. And you can imagine that that's a force that keeps the status quo in place. So just building the awareness of how this one issue is impacting these diverse constituencies enables, more votes, bigger budget, more people to show up to sign the petition or come to the march. So I think that's partly education, but education that points people to a common action that's going to lift all of their causes. I see Adam's nodding. Yeah, how would you add that?
Oh,
And I
yeah.
know that's probably what your day is all about. So
Yeah, that was so beautifully described, Beth. One of the things that's been most exciting about working on PFAS is seeing how, I mean, it's exciting and it's devastating on the flip side, but how intersectional the issue is, how many people it's impacted from really diverse parts of society. Um, I've been talking about the Penobscot Nation and this rural, mostly white community in Unity Township, very different communities that might not ever interact in their day-to-day lives. We see farmers working with environmental activists, working with hunting and fishing guides, working with firefighters, working with military veterans, parents who are concerned about their children's exposure. Very, very different classes of people who have a particular occupational or geographic risk factor exposure pathway. And as you said, when diverse groups like that can find common cause and understand a problem in a shared light and begin to address it together, really powerful things happen, and the issue elevates in the public eye and in political saliency, I think, really quickly, which is, I think, hopefully a lesson that we can all take forward to bring to other issues that we work on. And then in terms of like, what are specific ways that you can translate all of that new political capital garnered from community organizing towards policy change to hold corporations accountable? We're seeing, as the issue matures and as the communities press their elected officials and their states to act, we're seeing attorneys general across the country suing PFAS manufacturers and hopefully filling their state coffers with big sums of money to remediate PFAS in water systems and elsewhere. Here in Maine, we were able to extend the statute of limitations for PFAS contamination. This is a environmentally persistent toxin. And in the case of the farmland contamination, people are discovering it decades after the contamination happened in some cases. So adjusting our regulatory and legal frameworks where needed to allow people to seek justice and hold the responsible parties accountable is very important and is possible, I think.
yeah.
We've got, oh, sorry, Beth.
Well, just quickly, I mean, maybe if we allow ourselves to dream a little bit too, because this is bigger than any one of these issues that we face, whether it's climate change or PFAS or unsafe working conditions in oil refining. Like all of these issues have in common a worldview in our current economy that people are separate from nature, that nature is there to be, used for the powerful. And so we talk a lot about the precautionary principle, right? Like, what would it be to organize a whole economy out of caution and care? So where all these issues meet, like you're talking about a coalition for PFAS, we have similar coalitions for climate and health. I'm starting to think about the coalition of those coalitions that truly imagines a different, just economy across all of these things. And I know it's hard to imagine in our country right now, but I think we can't lose sight of it. That like the rules of how the earth operates have primacy over how the economy operates, and we've got to get those two aligned some way or another.
Well, this next question, I think that's a perfect lead into it, because this is a question about what we can do at the state level. So, often we are trying to address system level issues at one of the higher levels of systems. Right now, Adam mentioned that Maine was the first state to ban the spreading of PFAS contaminated sludge on farms. Maine was also the first state to ban PFAS in almost all consumer products. That ban has been replicated in several other states, including California had just recently voted to ban PFAS in quite a few product categories, not as comprehensively as Maine and Minnesota yet. So this question was, if California or another larger state bans PFAS in, let's say, everything, what type of national results happen? What type of international results happen? Can we at the state level or at the community level have these larger system level impacts, even if really larger governmental levels are not yet taking action?
Yeah. Do you want to take a shot at that, Adam?
Sure. Thanks, Beth. Yeah, it will be very exciting if California bans PFAS in the group of consumer products that they're considering banning it. And we'll have an enormous ripple across the country, I mean, and across the world. California is represents such a large chunk of our economy as a country, big population base, obviously. So I've heard in other instances when California enacts an environmental regulation in order for manufacturers to sell into that market, it's just worth it for them to shift all of their production to cleaner chemistry. So, as we state by state start to build a safer future through our policy work, at some point we can get to a critical mass where we don't actually have to get to all 50 states. We don't actually have to get something done at the federal level if nothing is moving at the federal level. We can get to that tipping point potentially and just shift the economic incentives. So it's in everyone's interest, obviously health-wise, to move to safer chemistry. But maybe we're close to a tipping point where it's in manufacturers' financial interest to get rid of these toxic chemicals too.
Yeah, and if I could make a larger point about multi-solving, I would also say what you've been talking about today is a great example of something we discuss about how change happens, and that change can start anywhere, and it doesn't have to start at the largest and most powerful point. Like, who would pick out Maine as the a leading economy? It's a small state population-wise and economically, yet what I'm hearing is a story of groundwork and experimentation and prototyping that's on the verge of being picked up by very large economies. And think about that, even if you're, that feeling of like, I'm just one person, what can I do? It doesn't matter, we're one small community. When we talk about change and multi-solving, we say it's fractal, and that it doesn't matter so much where it starts as how much you have high fidelity to the world you want to see. And the book there's not time now, but I get lots of examples in my book about change starting in unlikely places and spreading sometimes in surprising ways. So I try to encourage people to not lose heart and to know that your work, even if it seems small relative to the problems we're up against, has that potential. So you can be sure I'll be talking about Maine and PFAS now as one more of these examples. I'm really happy to know about it.
Thank you so much. And that is a perfect, we have one more quick question and then we'll be wrapping up. But that is, I think, a really good and hopeful message of the work that we do. It doesn't have to be that really big impact. Again, in Maine, the consumer products phase out of PFAS started some large international companies changing their production even before other states were taking action. So we had a reporting requirement and a whole bunch of companies had to report what they were putting PFAS in, got a bunch of press they didn't like, and started committing to change their production or actually changing their production. We have a big deadline coming up in January of 2026. So hopefully dental floss and lots of other things will be much safer for everyone in the country starting very soon. So the last quick question, Adam, this is one for you. This is a little bit in the weeds of nerdery, but how exactly is PFAS getting into that wastewater sludge? Is it mostly like industrial sources coming into our wastewater? Is it from consumers and homes? Where's that actually coming from?
Yes, yes, and yes. Yeah. Yes, it's going down the drain at a paper mill that's using PFAS in its industrial process and maybe adding PFAS to its finished product, a waterproof cup or bowl that's designed to be impermeable to water and oil. That's some of that is going down the drain and winding up at elevated levels in the sludge. But what we've seen here in Maine, when our DEP mandated that all of the wastewater districts start to investigate this problem, is that even very small wastewater districts with no real industrial activity in their town, a town that maybe has a car wash, but maybe not even that much of an industry, still their sludge was containing levels of PFAS that posed too much of a health risk. So that's just the contribution from the consumer products, and the impact of that on our wastewater. So that's again, that's a good reason to think about the PFAS in product regulations.
All right. Well, thank you both so much for this conversation. I think we could probably continue talking for another hour, but we did promise to wrap it up in the next couple of minutes. So I want to thank everybody who has been on today. There's a couple of additional questions that are coming in. I'm going to nerd out on them a little bit in this closing. But we really appreciate everyone who is interested in solving these really intense problems where we as individuals cannot solve PFAS, we cannot solve climate change, we cannot solve many of these things on our own. But when we come together at the local community level, at the state, nationally or internationally, we can together solve these complex issues and move towards a healthier, more hopeful future. So Beth, thank you so much for sharing. We will be sharing a recording and a discount code for Beth's book, as well as information on the next webinar here coming shortly. That'll be in your inbox soon. And in terms of what you can do right now, join and follow and participate in state and community organizations like Defend Our Health, like other organizations in your own state if you're not in Maine. But if you are in Maine or if you're nationally, still join Defend Our Health. We've got a great newsletter and lots of good legislative policy and educational and organizing that you can bring back to your state as well. But this is so, especially given what is happening internationally and nationally, having hope and knowing that we can start moving forward on these problems and that we can continue making progress on problems. We are not just stuck fighting defensively. We can continue making forward positive progress for health in our communities. We can address and advance equity. We can reduce health disparities. It is just an exciting time. And there is so much to be hopeful for, even if sometimes the news alerts on your phone, maybe don't look at those. They're sometimes a little stressful, but there is so much we are doing around PFAS, around plastics, around climate change, around other major sources of harm that we are reducing, we are addressing, we are improving health across the world, across our communities. So I really appreciate all of you here. And it's let us go forward with hope and with joy in our hearts and know that together we can do this. We can solve it. Take a look at Beth's book. Make sure you follow Defend Our Health. Adam, thank you so much for sharing the organizing and PFAS expertise. Beth, thank you so much for sharing your multi-solving approach with us. We really appreciate you all. I hope that you all have a fantastic day.